I think that open source AI is going to become the industry standard, just like Linux did. It gives you control to customize and run your own models. You don't have to send your data to another company, and it's more affordable. I also think that the transparency and scrutiny are going to make open source AI safer and more secure, just like other open source software. We've done rigorous testing on all of our models, and of course, since they're open, everyone can do their own testing as well. We are partnering with a lot of companies to make it easier for everyone to use Llama.
And welcome back to another episode of the 100-Year Podcast. My name is Adario Strange, here with a special guest. The original plan with the 100-Year Podcast was to have more thinkers about the technology and artificial intelligence space, particularly people who spend, I guess, a book's worth of time thinking and unpacking the topics that we discuss. And we finally got somebody from the book publishing world, Peter Cohen. The author of Brain Rush, How to Invest and Compete in the Real World of Generative AI. How you doing, Peter?
I'm doing great, and I'm delighted to join you. This is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, and you're also an associate professor of management at Babson College in Massachusetts?
That's correct.
You have been publishing books on technology in general for at least a couple of decades. Can you kind of give us a sense of your background, like how you came to become an author, and what's the undergirding kind of background story of like where, how you got here?
Okay, yes, I can definitely tell you that story. I'll try to hit the highlights. When I was a freshman in college, I told my dad that I wanted to be a poet, and I think he freaked out, and he said, "Look up poet in the yellow pages and see if you can find anybody." So long story short, no poets. I decided to change my career focus a few times. By the time I was a junior, I decided I wanted to be a strategy consultant, which would help high-tech companies to grow. I learned how to program computers, in my early teens, and was really into computers. And I also thought when I was in college that computers would have a tremendous effect on the world over the course of my career. So I decided to do that. I went to work for a consulting firm after college, founded by some MIT professors. While I was there, one of the founders of the company decided to start an AI company. And this was decades ago. So I had an early exposure to AI back many, many decades ago. The company did not succeed. I can talk about the company later, but I learned a very important lesson about that. And then I went to work after I graduated from business school with a professor at Harvard Business School named Michael Porter, who's sort of famous for strategy. And then started my own consulting firm. And that was many decades ago. I've also invested in many startups. And it was during the first couple of years of that consulting firm that I got the idea from a client to write my first book. And it was called The Technology Leaders, How America's Most Profitable High-Tech Companies Innovate Their Way to Success, which was based on a consulting report that I had done for a very large R&D department of a very large company in Tokyo. So that was my first book, and I've since written 17 books. And Brain Rush, How to Invest and Compete in the Real World of Generative AI, is my 17th book, and it came out earlier this month, and I'm super excited about that.
Now I want to get into the book, but before I get too far, I want to go back to, you made a comment about the first AI company you engaged decades ago.
Yes.
And you said you learned an important lesson. Can you share that? What is that?
Oh, absolutely. The company, when I was in graduate school at MIT, artificial intelligence was really the hot topic. This was many, many decades ago. And the company that was started was called Applied Expert Systems. So there was this concept of expert systems, which essentially means you talk to an expert and you write a computer program that encodes their decision rules for a particular area of expertise. And so that was what this company was doing. And it was doing it for a specific process of people who do financial planning, do personal financial planning. So it was expert systems for personal financial planning. And to make a long story short, the company raised millions of dollars from a large insurance company, and it failed because the technology was not creating enough value for the person who was doing the personal financial planning to make it worth buying. Nobody wanted to pay for it. And I'm looking at generative AI, and my perspective in writing the book and thinking through this was heavily influenced by that outcome. I've like that is one of the most important lessons that I have learned in my career, is that just because you have some brilliant technologist from MIT, it does not automatically translate into a successful business. That the missing piece is that the technology has to provide more benefits for the price than competing technologies. And if it's a new technology, it has to provide a lot more benefit for the price than what's out there now. Otherwise, it won't be a successful business.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Now let's get to the book. Um, Going through this book, it was interesting. Like, there are I have a bunch of AI books in my library, and everything, they touch on everything from kind of predictions about the future, philosophy, even, I even have some technical books, even though I'm not an engineer. But I feel like this book, your book, is unique in that it's almost like a cheat sheet. It's very comprehensive. It starts with explaining what generative AI is, and then it breaks down category by category what's happening, who the players are, kind of how to think about generative AI. It's like I said, I'm still reading through it, but I have to say, for anyone listening or watching, if you want kind of like a quick, like a quick start cheat sheet, I think this is it. Like this is it's everything like bundled in one. What made you take that approach? Because generally, I think people would take kind of like a less comprehensive approach and kind of hit one topic and just kind of drill down on that. What did you have this kind of cheat sheet idea in mind? Like what was behind the approach?
What drove me to write this particular book was back in May of 2023, a little over a year ago. I knew about ChatGPT, had been around since November and of the previous year, and had grown to 100 million users within 2 months, which was amazing. But what really I was curious about is whether any of that activity would translate into revenues for a real company. And then I came across, I knew about NVIDIA, and it was in May of 2023 that NVIDIA reported a quarter in which its previous quarter was not very good, but it was forecasting like 5-fold growth in revenue, much more than expected for the then current quarter. And then I sort of realized, my gut reaction was, this just, history doesn't rhyme. I mean, history doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes. And I felt like history was rhyming. This was Mark Twain supposedly said something like this. So anyway, I just felt like, wow, in my gut, and I've, having written, all these books, I realized that it takes a lot of sustained passion and focus to do it. And I just realized at that moment that this generative AI thing was going to be a tremendously very interesting topic. But also, I'm a professor of strategy and entrepreneurship. And I'm looking at this phenomenon, and I'm seeing a lot of books about, generative AI is going to destroy the world and end humanity. It's going to make everybody rich, and they'll never have to work again. Government has to step in and regulate it. Government has to leave it alone. All this kind of very extreme kind of points of view on it. And I'm thinking about it from the perspective of, okay, I'm going to go into a classroom and be teaching students about strategy and entrepreneurship. Is this a complete hype job, or is this something that's actually valuable, or is it somewhere in between? I shared the final chapter of the book with an editor at Barron's, and her feedback was, this is a very unique book because it sort of has a level-headed approach to generative AI. It's not a sort of a polemic. It's basically looking at it from the perspective of how it will be useful from the perspective of all these different stakeholders. So that's sort of a long answer to your question, or maybe I didn't answer it.
No, it's a great answer. I want to come back to your experiences in the classroom in this new age of AI. But first, I want to talk about history rhyming.
Yes.
I often talk about Web 1.0, I guess you would call it, and kind of like the beginning of the popularization of the web / internet. Do you see, like, I feel like there are hype, they call them hype cycles,
yes,
in the business world. I'm seeing this hype cycle, but I'm seeing kind of I feel like I'm seeing some parallels to what happened with Web 1.0. whether it's the stock market, investment. However, I think the difference here is, in Web 1.0, a lot of there was a disconnect between the mainstream business world, being that they didn't really believe in the internet or the web, and they were very skeptical for quite some time, I think, until Web 2.0. Whereas, people in Silicon Valley and, insiders understood the opportunity and what was happening. So there was a big disconnect. I think the big difference here is that everyone, they've learned, like we seem to have learned from the past, and everyone very quickly understands the opportunity and excitement here. Having said that, there does seem to be maybe a little bit of hype. And I'm wondering, what are the parallels that you see, good and bad, between now and the original .com boom and followed by the bust, as we both know?
Okay, well, that is something I've been, was thinking a lot about, and I'm doing a syllabus for a course that I'm going to be teaching in the MBA program on my book. And the course begins by comparing generative AI to the internet and to blockchain, and comparing how those technologies evolved and how they were adopted over time. And the key differences, and I've so far only focused really on the difference between generative AI and the internet. And there's one number that sticks in my mind that really exemplifies the difference between generative AI and the internet, and that is 2,888, which is 2,888 is the number of internet-related companies that went public between 1996 and 2001, or it was 1996 and 2001. There have been 0 companies, startups related to generative AI that have gone public since this generative AI wave got started. 0. And that's not just, the reason that that's happening is you sort of alluded to it, is back then, large companies did not think that the internet was a thing. They were not afraid of it affecting their business. They didn't take it very seriously. And it wasn't until, Amazon started, devouring all these different retail segments that they sort of started to wake up and said, we need to do something about this. By contrast, this whole generative AI thing has really been driven, in my view, by the largest cloud services providers, because they saw that there is a tremendous amount of hunger for cloud services by companies that are developing large language models. So, for example, Microsoft made a $13 billion investment in OpenAI. They saw the growth going on there, and actually they've been trying to do AI for many years, as I talked about in the book. But I think it was the opportunity, and they basically invested $13 billion, which is effectively a credit for OpenAI to use their Azure cloud service to train generative AI models. And so even though there are startups involved in the generative AI space, they are so dependent on these large cloud services providers to build their models and operate the models that they are in effect operating subsidiaries of these giant companies like, Amazon and to a certain extent Facebook and of course Microsoft. So this is really a wave driven by the established companies. And there's one other thing I'll say very quickly, which is that I have noticed that CEOs and companies in general have what I would call a bipolar attitude towards generative AI. If you go back to this January, the CEOs came back from Davos and they said, we've got to put money into generative AI. I'm going to give the CIO billions of dollars and have them just do something with generative AI. And that was, a huge push from the CEOs. But at the same time, at the other extreme, they're terrified of hallucinations and hacking and, and having their company's reputation destroyed by a misfired AI chatbot, which means that you have hundreds of experimental pilots being done within the company, but very few generative AI systems are being let out of the bag, let out, into being the wild. So this is, to me, the fundamental question is that you have $150 billion being invested in technology like data centers, GPU chips, cooling technology, energy, all this stuff to build these generative AI models. But the question is whether these companies will generate enough profit to fill that investment hole. In other words, if they had borrowed money to finance all of this and they had to repay all the money, where would it come from?
To that point, a recent report just came out indicating that OpenAI may lose, I think, $5 billion this year, which is interesting since they are, I would say, arguably the best funded AI company on the market. So if they're losing 5 billion or possibly 5 billion, upwards of 5 billion this year,
Yes.
it kind of indicates, all these little $20, payments from all the different users and the agreements with the various companies. It's not quite there yet. So do you think we're in for, and not to focus on OpenAI, talk about the entire marketplace. Do you think we're in for some sort of .com bust? I mean, I know that like you referred to the initial public offerings of Web 1.0, and we're not kind of in that environment now, but there still seems like an opportunity for us to maybe drop off of a cliff in terms of funding and the hype dying down and maybe taking a turn. Do you think we're like, what do you see ahead in terms of, I guess, dark skies for AI in business?
Okay, from a business perspective, after the book came out, I thought of a new idea that's not in the book, which is the value pyramid. The value pyramid, you think of a pyramid and think of it having three slices. So the bottom slice, which is where most of the applications are being done right now, I call it the overcoming a creator's block is the lowest level. I don't call it writer's block because people are using the technology for coding, for images, for videos, and for writing. And generative AI can help you you're sitting there, you're going to write something, you're struggling to put the first word in or do something to get started. And this helps you overcome that. So that is the way a lot of people are using it. And, it's valuable, but it doesn't really have huge amounts of value for business because there's no competitive advantage there. Everybody is using the same thing. Everybody can basically get the same benefits. So, if you're not using it, maybe you're going to be falling behind. But, most people are. It's pretty easy to use. And some people use it more than others, but it's not a huge source of revenue. It's certainly not a source of revenue. It's just expenses. But it does make people, I think they can do more. So that's something. And then the next level up is which I call the next sort of level of the pyramid is basically boosting productivity. It's making specific business functions like sales and marketing and coding more efficient. People can get more done, which is also valuable. But again, it doesn't generate revenue. And so the highest level, the peak of the pyramid, is the part of generative AI that actually increases a company's revenue. And that is where the value is. So what I'm it's a long-winded way of saying that if you think about the value pyramid, there's a tiny number of applications right now that are just being sort of released into the world, which are at the top of that pyramid. And it's only at that part of the pyramid where AI is helping to increase a company's revenue that it will generate enough value in terms of an increased stock price, which will allow companies to sell stock to the public and then generate some cash to pay for this, where the value is going to be. So yes, there are going to be a lot of people using AI or building AI applications, which will not add enough value to be able to survive without more venture capital. And it's only the ones at the very top of that pyramid, of which I think there are going to be many, but at this point, it's too early to tell, that will actually be able to become self-sustaining companies.
Kind of like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs for AI and business in a way.
Yeah, that was probably the thing that, I remember learning about that in college, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And yeah, in my mind, there's that shape of how it plays out. I mean, I think in the internet era, there were also tons of companies that, didn't make it. I taught a case about Webvan. Towards the end of the .com era, there were a lot of people who, worked for traditional companies like Goldman Sachs and McKinsey who decided that they were going to go out and do internet better than everybody else. So there was this guy who was a partner at Accenture. I don't think it was called Accenture then. I think it was called Anderson Consulting. But he decided he's going to start a company that's going to do grocery delivery across the country. So they were able to raise money, go public, and they basically built a bunch of warehouses across the country. They never figured out whether it was possible to deliver groceries to people they ordered on the internet. And essentially, they never got it to work. And they had spent all this money. The dot-com crash happened. They couldn't raise any more money. The thing went out of business. So that's a very visible example of a failed internet startup that was actually able to go public. So, clearly the market for stock and internet companies was much riper, much more lively than the market for generative AI startups is right now.
Yeah, it's when I think back on, the Web 1.0 days, it seems like timing is everything. There are so many businesses from Web 1.0 that exist today that they're not the same company, but the same idea is thriving, like a pets.com. Like you said, the web van is basically Fresh Direct, which is, seems to be, and, I guess Amazon to in another way. So many of those companies, just the timing was off. And I almost think, I wonder sometimes, with what's happening in AI, I don't want to talk about this just yet. We're gonna get to this, but just this idea of displacement in the job market for humans.
Yes.
I feel like there are many things that will disrupt the job market, but the timing is a bit off. Like we're not quite there. Let's just say, if there was some magical button to pause AI and allow human society and human business to maybe accelerate and mature for another at least 50 years, there might be some, I think, better support systems for the disruption that is happening right now. So I think we're maybe the rhyming, the history rhyming thing, maybe that rhyme will come in the form of, maybe a dark ages for the workplace, where people are figuring out how to work with AI, or in some cases, AI completely eliminates certain jobs. And there's kind of like this kind of period of people kind of like wandering, through the business landscape, either figuring it out, hacking together their own solutions. So maybe that's another, maybe I'll write that book, the coming dark age for, I don't know, AI workplace,
Yeah, I definitely, you sent me this article about people, game builders losing their jobs. And yeah, that was a very, I had not seen that article, and I found it very interesting, and I definitely would have included it in my book if I had read it before I wrote the book. But I definitely think that there are some jobs that are going to be eliminated. And I think that, initially people were probably not too worried about coders being replaced by generative AI because there was such a shortage of that talent. And, during the pandemic, particularly, there was such a shortage of coding talent, they could just write their own tickets. But, now if generative AI can allow people to be so much more productive, I've seen 30% increases in productivity. In theory, you might not need as many coders unless that just opens up the possibility of those coders to develop entirely new things that don't even exist now. So, that's another possibility, is that some of the more mundane aspects of people's work get done by the generative AI, and they can do the more creative things. So that, that's sort of a more optimistic view of things. I can tell you that I have been experimenting with generative AI over the last year to find, to basically, when I start my semester, I tell students, my goal is to future-proof you. That's what I meant to say. Future-proof you. Make sure that, you will not be replaced by ChatGPT or some other bot, AI bot, because I want you to have skills that the ChatGPT can't do. So to give you an example of what I did, I went to ChatGPT and I said, please create a new company that will, in 10 years, take over the leadership of the online streaming business from Netflix. So I was challenging it to come up with a new business idea, which is what my strategy students essentially do. I asked them to come up with a new idea, some new growth business opportunity for an established company. And I asked them to sort of take that that kernel of an idea and turn it into, okay, now here are all the key choices you need to make. Here's what your organization is going to look like. Here are the fundamental, customer problems you're trying to solve. Here's how you're going to compete with all the established companies and give better value so you can gain market share. And here's a financial projection so that you can raise capital. So these are all the things that I, try to teach my students how to do. And I tested the ChatGPT to see if it could do any of these things. And it turns out that there was two things that ChatGPT was really good at, and the rest it was not good at. So there's a lot of things that students can still do that ChatGPT can't do.
So you kind of framed the positive aspect of introducing AI into the classroom at the university level, but I'm curious, are you seeing any kind of, like, how do you get someone to write a paper written by themselves and where they're learning? Like, my understanding, my perspective about college is this is where you learn how to think. This is, you're training your brain how to think. So when you get out into the business world, assuming, let's say, you're going to medical school or, law, okay, then you get like a specialization. But in terms of like your foundational classes, this is where you're learning how to think, learning how to work with other people, teams, taking responsibility for projects, bringing projects to completion. What do you do in an environment where you give them an assignment to put together a big paper about some topic, and half of the class, if not more, are using Claude, ChatGPT? Like, how do you what are you doing with that? Like, how's that playing out?
Yes, well, there's sort of a lot of flexibility in terms of how professors in my school are using it in the classroom. What I do is I say, when you work on your group project at the end of the semester, you can use ChatGPT, but you have to have a citation saying, here is the prompt that I gave. Here's when I did it. Here's what it gave. So I want the details of what they did with ChatGPT to be like a citation, as if you were citing any kind of a source. So that's one thing. The other thing is that in answer to the more important question you asked of how do you train them to think? How do you get them? How do you create an environment where they can think and work with other people in groups and get things done? All those things. I have a process, a methodology that I have been teaching students for my strategy class, which is the core strategy class for the undergraduates, for a long time. And so that methodology and that process is something that I give them practice with throughout the semester, 4 or 5 assignments. So I get them to work in groups to solve these problems following my methodology. So the methodology is sort of is how they should think. Now, I'm also not telling them that they have to use this forever. I mean, I want them to learn something which is a foundation off of which they can build once they get out into the real world and they're doing things in the real world. Having said that, let me just cut to the chase of the two things that I found ChatGPT to be good for. One of them was to come up with a list of possible solutions to a problem that the company is facing. Maybe 4 out of the 5 ideas will be things that were obvious or that they'd already thought of, but maybe 1 or 2 of them will be just a little different and kind of inspire them to think about something new. The other thing I found kind of surprising is that part of coming up with a new idea and using it to win new customers is talking to customers and asking them, why do they buy from company X or company Y, and what would it take for them to switch from company X or company Y to your company's product? And for that, students need to learn how to do customer interviews, need to have conversations with customers to find out, what are the criteria they're using to decide between a set of competitors. Criteria like, price, quality, breadth of whatever it might be. It differs for each customer, it differs for each product, but basically understanding that and having those conversations so you have real insight into the thinking process of your customers. So ChatGPT is really good for helping you come up with 6 or 7 questions that you can ask them. And that's a very valuable thing for students who haven't done a lot of customer interviews, to use that as sort of the tool. But that when you ask ChatGPT to say, okay, now, given your vast knowledge of all these people who are buying this product, tell me what the answer is. Tell me what the customers are going to say. And it just doesn't have any idea what to do. It doesn't know. So the students still need to do the customer interviews. They still need to have the skill of doing the customer interviews. And there's a whole raft of other things that ChatGPT can't do. It can't tell you, the size of the market opportunity. It can't do any kind of financial projections. It's terrible at numbers. It's terrible at any kind of analysis. It just doesn't, it was designed to predict what the next word is going to be. And it was not designed to do numerical analysis. And it doesn't do it very well. That could change over time, but right now it's not there.
This is interesting that we're talking about how to think and how to, I guess, in a way, work with, and in some cases, maybe even compete with these AI tools. In 2022, when I really started getting my own hands dirty with AI, it came to me it was very clear to me. Like my early experiments were mostly with generative AI in imaging and, still images and art. But it became very clear to me that my profession, my lifetime profession of media and journalism, this was kind of like this was like, a comet coming, and how are you going to build a raft? Are you going to figure out a different planet to go to? Like, what are you going to do? And it took me a long time to figure out, I guess, the formula, I think, for journalists and just writers everywhere. When you have a tool out there that can basically mimic and create brand new text, but mimic the way we think and mimic various writing styles. And I think it's embodied, this is a good plug for the 100-Year Lens newsletter. It's embodied in the newsletter that we do, in that I always try to think, what am I bringing as a writer and a thinker to the table that an AI tool could not? Meaning, when I walk out into the world and I go into a store, a retail outlet, and I actually walk down the aisle and I speak to customers and I handle products, AI can't do that. If I travel to a different country and I engage the locals and maybe I learn a bit of their language, and kind of like, I forget the New York Times author who's always talking about his taxi cab rides. I think you know who I'm talking about. I'm forgetting his name. He was like the Lexus and the olive tree. I can't remember his name.
Thomas Friedman.
But,
Thomas Friedman.
Friedman. Yeah, Thomas Friedman. He's always talking about kind of his taxi rides and his insights. And this is the kind of stuff that AI can mimic, but it can't, and people make fun of his style of, kind of like they're saying, oh, it's facile analysis. But no, this is the value in being a human being in this era of being able to actually go out into the world, touch things, touch people, have real experiences. And I think increasingly, at least for writers, that will be the key is, before you put finger to the keyboard or start up the voice dictation, think about, what is it that I'm about to write that AI could not? And I think that's hugely important. Take me into the book a bit. You have so many categories, and I want to read some of the categories for the listeners and viewers. Mining generative AI's end user value, mapping the generative AI ecosystem, and you go down into consulting, AI software, AI cloud platforms, AI hardware. Then finally, you get to panning for generative AI gold. Let's say, excluding your kind of conclusion statement in the book, if someone only had, 30 minutes to consume one chapter focused on one category, one industry, what would you pull out of your book that you think is the most vital, or perhaps the most game-changing in terms of business moving forward?
Well, I've personally, as a consultant, I was really fascinated to see how different consulting firms were tackling the topic of how to assist companies with generative AI. So I found that really interesting. On the other hand, when I was writing the book, some of my neighbors, I sent them chapters. And the one chapter that seemed to be of most general interest was the chapter on sort of the light and dark side of generative AI and what citizens should do about it and how policymakers should think about how to regulate it. So I think that was what I had, I think in chapter 8 or 9, was basically that chapter about sort of from a societal standpoint, what are all the dark and light sides of generative AI, and what should they do about it? And from the standpoint of business, I will tell you that from my experience in the AI company that I mentioned at the beginning, which basically failed because it wasn't creating value, I think the most important chapter for business readers to look at is the one about how are companies using generative AI and what are the case studies. There's lots of case studies. I did interviews with executives who are making the decisions to build these systems and why they did it and how it's working. I had a lot of case studies from the medical industry and also from the financial services industry. But I mean, I have cases from all over the place. And to me, I think that would be the most valuable thing for business people to look at, to get inspired and to think about how they might use it, but also to bear in mind that this value triangle concept that I talked about earlier in our conversation, which really isn't even in the book, but it's something that I sort of came up with after I wrote the book, is a really nice way to frame the decision about, what kind of applications to use, what kind of applications to sort of steer away from. But ultimately, over the long run, I see that this whole generative AI thing will only be valuable if it creates growth for companies. I will summarize my entire academic career, which is, not that long, like 20 years or so, is focused on one thing, which is growth. How can companies grow? And I've kind of boiled that down based on having started off when I wrote my first book of going on CNBC and talking about technology stocks, which I knew nothing about how to talk about the stock side of things when I first started doing that. But I've been studying, stocks and what makes them go up and down for a long time. And it all comes back to growth. And so to me, the examples that I gave of how companies are using generative AI all comes back to whether that produces growth for, if it's a business to business kind of a product, does it produce growth for a company's business customers? If it's a consumer product, does it make consumers buy more? So one of the examples that I wrote about recently was if you put together sort of an online sort of a weekly circular that you would get from a retailer that it tells you the deals of the week. And instead of giving them, one set of printed color paper that you send to every single customer, it'll just leave lying around, and you convert that into an app that will send you a weekly circular with the best deals based on your own interests and what you purchased in the past. That concept is a very simple concept that actually I saw a study that said that it will increase the revenues by 3 to 5%. That's an example of an application of generative AI, which I do believe will create sufficient value to make it worth companies investing in. Anything that will cause people to buy more. There's many other examples in the book about companies that are doing things that are going to increase their ability to grow. And that is really where people in the business world should be focusing their attention. And that growth should be something that is hard for other people to copy. It's got to be, in my view, a sustainable competitive advantage, which means it's valuable and it's hard to copy, and it makes customers better off.
That is a perfect segue into a story that just came out by Wired magazine. And it kind of talks about, I guess, the less positive side or the fear-based side of AI entering the culture. And in particular, the article focused on the gaming industry. And they spoke to someone who basically, uses a pseudonym, Noah. And Noah basically, in the wake of a bunch of layoffs at Activision Blizzard, the big gaming company, this Noah person says that they were, quote unquote, forced to use AI to do their jobs. A lot of 2D artists were laid off, Noah says. The department was slashed. Remaining concept artists were then forced to use AI to aid in their work. And I think they also, in the article, they also mentioned Riot Games is very aggressively using AI. And later in the Wired article, they talk about, they basically assert, and again, this is, as a journalist, I can kind of see through certain things. So, an opinion based on a poll can also be tainted by who you're directing your questions at. So if you are primarily, if you have a slant as the writer looking for a negative take, obviously you're going to speak to sources that will give you a negative take. So that may be the case here. Maybe it wasn't. There's no way to know without speaking to the author of the piece. But basically, their conclusion was that most artists, designers, graphic, designers that they spoke to 2D artists in the gaming industry, most said that they were not interested in using this tool. Now, I've seen to the contrary. I've seen people in the gaming world, graphic designers, embracing these tools and kind of supercharging their work. Nevertheless, I think in the same way that we just talked about AI hype, I think there also exists this kind of AI negative hype.
Yes.
That's unrelated to anything about super intelligence or Terminator robots. Simply, it's this negative AI hype, I guess, focused on, is this good for us? Should we be using this in our creative work? You talked about using this with your students. You're helping them embrace it. You're embracing it. Talk to me about what do you think about articles like this? I mean, this Wired is not known for being anti-technology or Luddites in any way, and yet here's Wired publishing this article about people being forced, quote unquote, to use AI.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that this happens, and particularly in the gaming industry. I'm trying to write a case about a business school case about a company in Sweden that's a gaming company, where I met with the CEO and the top executive team in January. And, recently they've been doing quite a few layoffs and cutting people. And they've been incorporating generative AI into their business to try to increase productivity. So I guess what I'm saying is that there are definitely companies that are seeing the need to cut costs. Maybe they're not experiencing the level of growth that they need. Maybe the new products that they are launching are not doing as well as they expected, and they need to cut people. So they're looking for ways to use the technology to have fewer people who are the most talented people, who are the most critical to the business, and make sure that they are as productive as possible, because they want to reduce their costs and they want to cut people. So I can just envision companies in a particular industry who want to do that, trying to think about, okay, what are the really most important skills that we have in our company? So, for example, in a gaming company, the most important skill might be somebody who's got tremendous creativity and can envision these worlds that are going to appeal tremendously to their core users. But maybe less important are things like drawing drawing two-dimensional images, or doing videos of things that can easily be done now with generative AI that are not so critical, that basically involve implementing the ideas. And so maybe some of the executives in that company are saying, well, if I have to cut somebody, I'm going to cut people who are doing things that are not central and critical to what allows us to keep growing. And so they will do that. But there are other industries where, they need all the talent they can get, and they just want to use the technology to increase the productivity of the people who are there, so they can, do more, build new products, provide better customer service, do all these different things. So I guess it's a long-winded way of saying that in some industries where there's a need to cut costs, people in the executive role are going to start looking for ways to use the technology to make the organization more productive. But ultimately, the value of this technology is not going to come from cutting. Nobody ever succeeded by cutting people. You can't cut your way to success. You have to invent your way to success. You have to come up with new ideas and new ways of generating growth in order to keep a company going. And that, to me, is the most fundamental skill of a business. And, if an AI could ever do that, then there would be no need for executives. But that doesn't seem to be an imminent concern from what I've seen.
I'm curious. I often think about kind of future scenarios. I try to future cast
Yes.
Many different possible outcomes. And I'm wondering if what we're experiencing now with smartphones, what is it? Constant, persistent distraction.
Yes.
I'm probably getting the phrase wrong.
Yeah.
But this idea that smartphones will be around for a very long time. I wonder if this is maybe just a temporary step. Like I mentioned earlier, the Borg,
Yeah.
and then I talked about real life with Elon Musk's Neuralink. Um, this could just be a middle step where we have, and let's say the whatever 5 years from now version of Neuralink is not invasive and it's something that you just affix magnetically or somehow affixed to your head or near your head, non-invasive, and it allows you to essentially have a Google brain or an AI agent working in tandem with your own thoughts, and you can then look people in the eye and maintain you're no longer looking down at this rectangular piece of glass, and it's still a bit of a distraction and background processing, but now it's super powered. Two questions. One, would you ever do that? I'm guessing with the flip phone the answer is probably no. Would you ever get any kind of Neuralink implant? And two, like, do you see that coming down? Like, do you think that's something humanity would ever embrace?
Well, I really don't know. I cannot envision myself letting Elon Musk put a probe in my brain. But on the other hand, I've had some pretty nutty ideas, and one of the ideas that I remember talking about decades ago was that the reason that people talk is because they're trying to send an image in their mind to somebody else's mind, and if there's a way of directly transmitting that image from my mind to your mind without language, then people would do that because it's much more efficient. So that's sort of an idea that I had. And I'm not really sure the technology will ever be there for that. And also, I noticed that, there's certain technologies that people think are really great. Like, there's a company called Facebook, and whoever is running it decided to change it to Meta Platforms because it was going to be the metaverse. I'm not really hearing a lot of people talking about the metaverse as much these days. So there's, Google Glass. I mean, people, there's certain technologies that seem really cool to technology futurists, but for some reason, society doesn't want to eat that dog food.
You mentioned Facebook. That's Meta. That's Mark Zuckerberg.
Right.
And he made news this month
Yes.
releasing an open source AI model. It's Llama 3.1.
I think that open source AI is going to become the industry standard, just like Linux did. It gives you control to customize and run your own models. You don't have to send your data to another company, and it's more affordable. I also think that the transparency and scrutiny are going to make open source AI safer and more secure, just like other open source software. We've done rigorous testing on all of our models, and of course, since they're open, everyone can do their own testing as well. We are partnering with a lot of companies to make it easier for everyone to use Llama.
From a business perspective, I often talk about open source AI and what its impacts on AI might be. And it seems like, I guess the simple way of looking at it is that closed models would be a way to defend profits. And open source seems like maybe it's the path toward, I guess, devaluation of your model. Now, Mark Zuckerberg, one of the most successful people in Silicon Valley, his stock is up. He's, on the cutting edge of not just the metaverse, AR, VR, and AI, but now even wearables. I have, the Meta Ray-Ban glasses that actually have AI embedded in them and allow you to walk around and identify objects and have information, streamed to you via audio. I mean, right now, Meta is at the top of its game. And yet he's saying open source is the way forward. So I want to know, from a business professor perspective, like, have you kind of parsed the open source versus closed source model of AI and how that might play out?
Well, I definitely think that the key idea behind open source is that if developers like it, that's really helpful. You need to have a platform that is widely adopted by developers if you're going to, have a successful business. You want to create an ecosystem around your technology, and this is something that when Zuckerberg was writing that article, and I was reading the article, I basically all I could think about was CUDA, which is the NVIDIA software that developers love. That it's been developing for well over 10 years for building applications using using NVIDIA's GPU chips. So the question really is to position open source connected to how compelling it is compared to CUDA, which is NVIDIA's software. If developers decide they're going to switch from Llama to from CUDA to Llama, then I would say Zuckerberg is going to be proven correct. Maybe he'll take away the people who are developing things in a closed source context. There's another thing that I thought about with regard to open source, which is that open source introduces the possibility of hacking. It's hard to protect open source software from people, with nefarious ends. It's open. I mean, how do you keep it from being hacked? And how do you keep it from, uploading it to, Citicorp's system and going in and taking everybody's account information? I think it can happen when you have private source as well, but when you open it up, it does create that risk. So, that's another question I sort of have in the back of my mind is it safe? And then ultimately, the fact that, Mark Zuckerberg is, talking his own book, so to speak. I mean, it's like if he came on and started talking about how great, Meta's platform stock is, you could see the direct connection to benefiting him. So, basically I see the positives of that being he could create a lot of benefit for developers. They would really want to develop better products using his open source technology, and certainly a lot of people like it. And the negative is that there are these risks, and also the possibility that it's just not as good as what CUDA has done, because they've been around longer and they've figured out how to do things that allow developers to build systems they want to build. So it's competing with sort of something like CUDA, definitely.
Zuckerberg mentions possible algorithm theft by China specifically. Then there was a paper by Leopold Aschenbrenner published, I guess, a couple of months ago now, called Situational Awareness. He makes a lot of claims in that paper. Most notably, at least for me, is that he thinks we'll have artificial general intelligence by 2027. Everyone has their predictions. Leopold is unique in that he is not one of the old guard of AI. He's not one of, kind of like the people who have been doing this for decades. He's fairly young. And he's also notable in that he recently left OpenAI. So he was part of the most, I guess, popular, advanced, well-funded AI company on the market. And he wrote this. And it was, I think some people are framing his paper, which is very long. Again, it's called Situational Awareness, if you want to look it up. They're framing it as, I guess, on the negative side of the AI outlook. But then they also say it kind of takes a nationalist stand. And, he makes a lot of comments about America must protect AI, and, China will do this and China may steal that. And I was actually surprised, going back to Zuckerberg's essay, that he was bold enough to say such a thing. So there's this interesting kind of like, I guess, armament or kind of military undercurrent invading these discussions about AI. I mean, we talked before we actually, started recording, and we talked about Asia and my time in Asia, your time in Asia. I mean, how do you feel about, like, do you think this is, a legitimate concern? How should we, as someone with, experience doing business in Asia, how do you think we should think about this?
Well, I had an experience in China. Basically, it was like 5 years ago. I've had a series of courses that I've taught where I take people to different startup ecosystems. And about 5 years ago, I took students on a trip to Hong Kong and Shenzhen. And in Shenzhen, I went to visit an AI company that basically takes all the images from all the cameras all over the major cities in China and tracks what everybody's doing, and uses the information to create social credit scores, basically that decide whether somebody can be free and travel outside of the country and get an education, or whether they basically are not allowed to leave their neighborhood and, can't go to school. This kind of approach to AI, part of me could not even believe that I was actually in there talking to the executives and seeing, how it works and all that kind of stuff. It was, my worst nightmare in terms of imagine, living in that kind of a society. Clearly there is it sounds to me like there's a fear of people having too much freedom, getting information. It feels like there's a fear of not being able to control the population. And that is what's driving fear of falling behind, fear of, not controlling what everybody's thinking. I think that there's probably history in China that kind of inspires this kind of strong desire. Having said that, I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of espionage going on. People are taking each other's intellectual property, and I guess ultimately, now it seems like the U.S. is definitely putting a crimp on companies like NVIDIA, not wanting them to sell their most advanced GPUs in China, things like that. So there's clearly some fear of that going on, and it's sort of a form of, I guess, war by other means, is espionage, a technology race, and I think that
AI Cold War.
yeah, and that's the other element of this is, speaking of Asia, is the geography. If you look at NVIDIA, NVIDIA is based in, California, but it doesn't manufacture chips. The chips are made by TSMC, which is in Taiwan. And probably they have, factories in different parts of the world, but it's headquartered in Taiwan, and mainland China, has expressed an interest in, from time to time, doing some things that look kind of militarily aggressive towards Taiwan, which, if for some reason, mainland China decided to invade and somehow shut down those factories, it certainly wouldn't be very good for the AI business not to be able to get those AI chips out to people who want to build generative AI models.
One of our recent guests we had on, he's the CEO and founder of one of the biggest AI chatbot companies in the space. And, when you bring up the topic of superintelligence to him, he kind of dismisses it. He feels that, AI is just a tool. Even if AI becomes, and I'm putting words in his mouth, but I'm kind of paraphrasing, even if AI becomes more advanced, it will always basically be beholden to the user, the human operator. It will do what humans program it or influence it to do. And the idea of the path from AGI to superintelligence, where you have an AI system or systems that can think for themselves and have their own ideas and thoughts, is that, well, when we do get to the point where maybe AI is discovering, new things that not just taking existing data and cobbling it together in different ways that, oh, did you take a look at this alternative? No, moving past that into inspirational, completely new ideas in physics, science, math, art, visual, interpretations of the world. When we get to that point, that may also be the point at which we reach superintelligence and we are no longer, I guess, the quote unquote apex predator on the planet. So I'm always curious to know what anyone in the AI space, whether it's someone thinking about AI deeply or building the companies, do you think superintelligence is, I guess, a real risk? Is it science fiction? And if you think it's a real thing, like, how do you think about it? Like, how are you forecasting, I guess, some people think it's going to come in the, I guess, 2040s, which is not that far off, actually. So how do you think about that?
Well, I think that to me, it just tells you the power of the movies. All these science fiction movies and books. To me, when you talk about superintelligence, I think of the HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey. You mentioned the Borg. There's Arnold Schwarzenegger, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of, and I'm not really a super big science fiction fan, but people find these things super compelling, and they create a vision of a world which people can. It's very powerful. People really respond to stories, and it kind of stimulates their imagination. So I look at the generative AI models now, transformer models. They're basically analyzing how people talk and using an analysis of words in a context to predict what the next word is going to be. Sometimes it creates for example, I asked the generative AI, I asked ChatGPT to go read my book and tell me what is the most compelling story in that book that would make people really want to learn more about the book and read the book. So it basically made up a story that was completely not in the book and never would have been in the book, about how some artist discovered some new way of painting, and using generative AI, it became a huge business opportunity for them, and they transformed the world and everything. And then I gave the feedback to the generative AI. I said, this is not in the book. Come try again. And it made up something else that was not in the book that was similarly dazzling and fascinating. It was a fascinating story that had no connection to my book. Now, maybe I tried to upload the book. I didn't want to upload the book to ChatGPT because I didn't want to give it the content to train it. But basically, it can make stuff up that sounds really interesting. I don't know if somebody's going to come up with a model or a way of doing AI that would actually be able to deliver on super intelligence. But as far as I know, I don't see it now. I didn't see it when I was researching the book. One thing I will say to sort of talk about this, I wrote 3 books about the .com era, and things changed over time. So I felt like when I was writing this book, it was before the first generative AI IPO. There's so many new things that could happen in the future. I mean, this is my point in time view of generative AI since I began working on this book a year ago, and what's happened since and where things are right now. I don't see the technology out there that would actually deliver on this concept of super intelligence. And I think people who are scared of it are not basing that fear on what is out there now, from what I've seen.
One last, I guess, insider question focused on the publishing industry. You're a longtime author. I've only published 1 book, and I've watched the publishing, whether it's digital, print, I've watched the publishing industry very closely.
Mm-hmm.
And it is now beset by all of these AI books that are flooding Amazon, flooding the marketplace. 2 questions. I apologize for even asking this, but I must ask: did you use AI to generate any of your book? And what are your thoughts on AI generated books? Are they legitimate? Do you think it's a problem? If it's okay, how can it be okay?
Okay, so somebody asked me that early in the process, and I said no, I had not used it. And then after that, I wanted to have some examples in the book of using AI for strategy problems. So I did have some interactions with AI, and what I did was I footnoted all the interactions. I said this all is based on these prompts that I gave to ChatGPT for on this day, and here's exactly what was done by ChatGPT. So it was all in the interest of putting together an example of how a person would use ChatGPT for a particular strategy problem, which I do in class. So it's essentially demonstrating how it would be used. So I did use ChatGPT for that, and it was footnoted so the reader would know that this was not my content. What you're talking about is just having a ChatGPT write a book, and I don't know if it's presented as written by ChatGPT or not, but if that did happen, I would be skeptical of what was in the book. Some of it might be good, some of it might be real, and some of it might be completely made up. So I would feel like I have to check. Maybe I have the right gut instinct about what needs to be checked and what is actually true, but I don't know whether it's creating just made up stuff, because I've seen it do that a lot, or whether it's creating really good content. A lot of the good content that I've seen it do is basically sort of like summarizing textbooks.
Right.
It's like it was trained on textbooks and it spews out what would be in a textbook. The quality of the writing is often, pretty good. So that seems to be what it would do for writing.
Well, I know when generative AI kind of really started, I guess, sparking and rumbling in the mainstream in 2022 into 2023, there was discussion among visual artists and writers that there should be some sort of almost FDA organic food or not kind of label on content that is either wholly or partially generated by AI. And I know initially, personally, I thought, wow, that might be a good idea. But then I thought, okay, but what happens if it's a hybrid work? What if it's a book that was generated 60 to 70% by AI, and then the author came in and really, muscle, like put in their own muscle and flowery, accoutrement and made it something different from what AI could produce? Then it's a hybrid product. And even then, what happens if the person decides, well, I'm just not going to put the label on this piece of art, this book, this film? And then that's when I thought, okay, well, you know what? I don't know that this label could ever work, because then you'd have to have some sort of agency, I guess, rigorously poring over these generative works, trying to figure out, if it was partially or wholly generated. And I think that even now the AI checkers, like in universities and high schools, they are not reliable. You can't really, they often mistake human written papers for AI generated papers. So we still don't really have a way to check this stuff. So, I mean, do you think it's kind of inevitable that even though the kind of cruft, like the vast majority of AI books flooding Amazon right now appear to be low quality, do you think it's inevitable that basically AI generated books improve in their quality and basically kind of merge into the human written work seamlessly, undetected?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that, one of the things that people want when they read a book is they want to know something about the author and what is their source of authority? What makes them somebody who would know enough about this topic to write a book and bring something distinctive to it? I suppose there are people who would be happy to get sort of how-to guides. How do I fix my iPhone? How do I change the battery in my iPhone? That doesn't have to be done by some famous author. So I will say that the publishing industry is, a very difficult business from a business standpoint. I mean, it's very hard. There's lots of people writing books, but very few of them actually make money for publishers. So, that's certainly a challenge that they're facing. So maybe they're willing to, have some people write books who are going to sell a lot of books and get AIs to write the rest of them. They don't really mind if, they use an AI to write a book that only sells 100 copies. They're paying them less than they would pay the author if they had a human author. Having said all that, I personally do not know if the AI could improve enough. If people see an AI book and they kind of immediately recognize that it's kind of rehashed textbooks, and it's not very good, it's not very original, they won't buy it. If, on the other hand, there's some novel that's written by an AI that's incredibly imaginative and just takes people into a different place and makes them feel magic, that's going to be successful. So, it comes down to the problem that I was talking about earlier in the conversation, which is, does the AI book create more value than the human written book? But where value is different for different kinds of books, on different topics for different readers. But if somehow an AI can write a book that creates much more value, one of my books, I called it a quantum value leap, a huge step up in value to the customer. If that happened, then it would be successful. That is it's not so much the technology. This comes back to like what I learned in that first AI company I worked with back many years ago. It's not so much what the technology is as in what the technology does for the person who is, the recipient of the product of the technology. If you create more value for them, if you create more benefit than competing products, that whatever product does that, regardless of the technology, that will win.
It occurs to me, and maybe this is already happening, but it occurs to me that if you had a human who took let's say their diary entries that they wrote or
Yes.
they dictated to themselves, and then they just took the sum total of those diary entries and, down or loaded them into a model, an AI model, and said, okay, take this and give me, a 3-act play narrative structure in the framework of a biography and do it in the style of insert famous author. I don't know. I mean, because the experiences are real and the output, the end output of the AI, once it goes through its machinations, would be read by the human who wrote the diary entries, and they could be vetted and edited. It seems to me that would be something that I don't know that I would discount. I don't know that I would give that the AI purity test of, oh, wait a minute, are you actually creating here? Because I would say that would be the purest form of hybrid working in tandem with AI to produce something beautiful and original. So just an idea out there for some of you listening and watching. If this ever crossed your mind, I probably just helped create a brand new industry. So who knows? Peter, I appreciate you joining us. People can check out your work, particularly the newest book, Brain Rush, at, I believe, Peter Cohen, and Cohen is COHAN.com.
Yes.
Any other places on the internet, social media?
Oh, yeah. I'm on LinkedIn. And of course, the book is available, at lots of, my publisher, A-Press, has a very nice website about it. It's available on Amazon. And I write a lot of articles for Forbes and Inc., where I recently have been linking to the book and writing about topics that are sort of beyond the book. So I would, love people to take a look at that as well.
Again, the book is Brain Rush: How to Invest and Compete in the Real World of Generative AI. And you can check out previous episodes of the 100-Year Podcast at 100year.com. And again, read our newsletter, The 100-Year Lens, at 100year.substack.com. Again, Peter, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. And to all of you listening and watching, we will see you next time.